Hello and welcome to Top Story. President Barack Obama has taken a step towards reclaiming his presidency after his self-confessed shellacking in November's midterm elections. His State of the Union speech spelled out a centrist economic vision and a call for national unity.
New laws will only pass with support from Democrats and Republicans. We will move forward together, or not at all. For the challenges we face are bigger than party and bigger than politics. At stake right now is not who wins the next election. After all, we just had an election. At stake is whether new jobs and industries take root in this country or somewhere else. It's whether the hard work and industry of our people is rewarded.
To assess the impact of this speech and Obama's political prospects, I am joined by historian and U.S. specialist Ann Kratz. Good morning, welcome to the program. Do you think this speech might have altered the mood in Congress?
Well, I think maybe that would be going a little far. I mean, the country is divided, but President Obama is approaching the State of the Union, or has approached the State of the Union speech with a renewed confidence in himself, paradoxically, after his shellacking, after the midterm election. His approval rating is up, approaching 50% overall. And that in itself is a positive point, obviously. But as to whether or not the new Republican majority, and especially the Tea Party elements among that new Republican majority, are going to be working hand in hand with him, that remains to be seen and is rather unlikely, especially given the response that was immediately given by Michelle Bachmann, the Tea Party top representative.
Let's take a listen to the Republican response, and it's interesting that there are two separate ones, one from a congressman and then another from Michelle Bachmann, the Tea Party member. Let's take a listen to them.
Americans are skeptical of both political parties, and that skepticism is justified, especially when it comes to spending. So hold all of us accountable. In this very room, the House will produce, debate, and advance a budget. Last year, in an unprecedented failure, Congress chose not to pass or even propose a budget. The spending spree continued unchecked. We owe you a better choice and a different vision.
Because last November, you went to the polls and you voted out the big spending politicians and you put in their place great men and women with a commitment to follow our Constitution and cut the size of government. I believe that we're in the very early days of a history-making turn in America.
Quite different tones from those two Republicans.
Indeed, indeed. Ryan, fairly moderate, talking about cutting deficits. Everybody can agree with that. Mrs. Bachmann being considerably more aggressive, showing that, in fact, I think Michelle Bachmann is a reflection of the identity crisis that Americans are living at this point. All Americans, basically, and maybe the entire West, is going through an identity crisis in front of the seemingly inexorable rise of China. And Michelle Bachmann has to remind her constituency, of American exceptionalism, which in fact, of course, President Obama did as well during his speech. And in fact, I think what was significant, among many other things in this speech, was that President Obama, for the first time that I can remember, as an American president, mentioned by name other countries that are doing better than we are doing. For instance, South Korea, and of course China and India. He said specifically, I'm not quoting him verbatim, but he said something like, China and India had understood the need for investment in research and development. And this is in fact a message that he also wanted to send to the American people. We cannot just cut deficits, we also have to invest for the future.
That's a very interesting way of playing to Republican needs to make America, as it were, better than other countries. But are they going to accept the investment? Because it's a double-edged sword. Yes, they want America to be exceptional, but they don't want the president to spend more money.
Right. Well, this is going to be their problem now, in a way. President Obama has put it squarely into their lap. He has also mentioned during the course of that speech a number of measures that would reduce the deficit. For instance, he said that he would freeze the spending level for the next 5 years. He also appealed to the Republicans with something that's dear to their heart by talking about reducing corporate taxes. And apparently the business community reaction to that particular item was extremely good, as you might imagine. American corporate taxes are the highest in the world at this point. And he also mentioned something about the reform of the tax code. So that will appeal to Republicans, to the business community, etc.
I suppose the difficulty with moving to the center is that the Democrats on the left will be even more unhappy.
Well, you know, first of all, I'm always surprised when I hear that President Obama has to move to the center. President Obama is a centrist, especially if you compare him to, say, European leftists. And American leftists, democratic leftists, progressives, as we call them, are also rather to the right of any European real leftist.
But do they back things like this, you know, lower corporation tax and reforming the tax codes? I mean, to me, that sounds more like a Republican process. I'm probably wrong because I'm a European.
No, you're not absolutely wrong. But I think American leftists, as you call them, are more concerned with issues that have to do with human rights, with the wars that are being conducted, with Guantanamo, with freedom, you know, some of the freedoms that were eroded under the Bush era. As far as running the economy are concerned, almost every single American is a capitalist.
So these points that Obama made, he said pressing some of the right buttons with the Republicans with whom he has to share power now. Do you think that's enough to get this new session of Congress really moving ahead, or is it just a temporary bounce, perhaps, in the opinion polls say, and then it will be back to the same gridlock as before?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, that is, you know, I cannot tell the future. Obama is giving the Republicans and the right a number of things that they wanted. So presumably this will help to grease the wheels anyway, you know, and go forward. He has stood firm on the health care. He has said that the military expenses should be reduced, and that should please the American left, by the way, because this has already been undertaken by Secretary of Defense Gates. So he has shown himself to be, certainly he is very willing to work with the opposition.
One final point, Anne, you mentioned China and India, but in terms of actual foreign policy, there was very little. Can we expect a sort of disengagement now, despite, you know, a change from all the speech to the Muslim world and those kinds of things?
Yes, well, I found it personally a little surprising that there wasn't more about foreign policy because, after all, we are still engaged in 2 wars, and the Iraqi situation was dismissed with a wave of the hand, and in Afghanistan, progress was mentioned, and withdrawal was mentioned, but other than that, there was absolutely nothing. What was interesting, though, is that he did mention Tunisia. Sort of giving his support to the Tunisian Jasmine Revolution, which is basically interesting, but it doesn't carry very much consequence because at this point nobody knows who is going to be the next leader in Tunisia. Still, it's interesting and it's giving a little bit of a...
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Thank you very much, Anne Kratz, and that's all for this edition of Top Story.